When devout Catholic Tracy Wygant marries local boy Chris Chanowitz, she thinks it will be forever.
I don't believe in divorce. I believe in marriage.
She married for better, for worse, no matter what.
But the worst comes quickly.
He told me he was in love with another woman.
Tracy fell to her knees and told him not to leave her.
Tracy's hopes and prayers fall on deaf ears.
We don't trust him, and he's a liar.
Taylor told me that her father and her went with this other woman.
Until death do us part becomes the only way out.
He premeditated this. He planned it.
He put a blindfold around my eyes. I thought it was going to be something romantic. I couldn't wait for my surprise.
It was cheaper to pay for a funeral than a divorce lawyer.
I love my family. Family has always been important to me. Stay-at-home mom, a dad that worked very hard, 2 to 3 jobs a week. He was a worker. If your hands weren't dirty, he said you didn't work today. I'm the oldest. I have a sister, Kelly, and a brother, Ray. It was a really good childhood.
Tracy Wygant comes from a devout Catholic family in upstate New York. In the 1960s, she is a child growing up in an idyllic suburban life.
A lot of neighborhood kids hung out all day on their bikes. My parents had an above-the-ground pool.
My mom would make everybody lemonade and peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. Everybody came to our house to swim, and people wanted to be in our house.
Including the nuns of St. Mary's from the local convent, who adopt the Wygant family as their own.
They came to our house for picnics. The neighbors would see a carload of nuns getting out and sitting in the back with us and barbecuing.
My dad worked at Mount St. Mary's Convent. He was their plumber, and he ended up doing everything. We would go for Mass on Christmas Eve down at their church. Being with these sisters, the Catholic religion, it was constantly there. It's just really special to have them in our lives.
Tracy is so sheltered by her family life, she is tormented when one day she finds herself the target of a bully at school.
There was one instance where we were on the bus and he made fun of her and she started crying. I had a pickle in a jar from a science class experiment that I forgot was in my duffel bag. When he was walking off the bus, I swung my duffel bag and hit him across the back of the head. I'm sure it hurt, and I told him to leave my sister alone.
The problem with me, I was very shy and very timid.
My sister Tracy is the older sister. She's 3 years older than I am. But I really do believe that that is the day where I took on that role of trying to protect her.
When I turned 18, I went to Mount St. Mary's College in Newburgh in 1978, and then I just went into teaching.
Between studying and a part-time job, Tracy doesn't go out much.
When I was in college, I didn't dorm in this school. I wanted to be home.
But one day, when a friend asks her out on a double date, she accepts, and it's a date with destiny.
We decided to go out for dinner, and she comes with a man. He's a very nice-looking man. Brown hair, mustache, because they were big back in those days. And we seemed to talk a lot.
Tracy finds herself ignoring her date and is attracted to her friend's date, whose name is Chris Chanowitz. He's a local guy who works at a commercial offset printers.
He comes from a family of 5 kids. He grew up Catholic in the town of Newburgh, about 10 minutes from where I lived. I did think he was cute.
Tracy doesn't see Chris again until a few months later when she spots him outside a mall in Newburgh.
Kelly and I were going out for dinner, and I pointed Chris out to my sister, and she said, "Go give him your phone number." I remember being very nervous, and I went up to him and I said, "Call me sometime." And he called me the next day.
On their first date, Chris and Tracy go out for pizza and hit it off. Tracy has never had a serious boyfriend, and soon she is falling in love.
I had butterflies in my stomach, and I couldn't eat. I felt that feeling like lovesick or something. And then when I would come out of college, he would leave notes for me on my car. And every week he gave me a rose. I couldn't wait to go to my car and see the note. Like, you know, that was fun. That was like happiness.
Chris liked her because she has a good heart. She's sensitive, she's sweet. She was about to have a career. She treated him really, really well. She made him a priority in her life. He seemed absolutely perfect for her.
On Halloween night, just 8 months after they meet, Chris plans a special surprise.
We were going out to the movies, and he was really late. And I was mad that he was late. And he gave me a plastic pumpkin, and inside was all this candy. And I looked, and there was a box. It was a diamond engagement ring. He never really came out and said, "Would you marry me?" or anything like that. It was like typical me. Took it, put it on, we're getting married. None of the words were said.
We felt happy for Tracy when she got engaged. We did like Chris, and we were happy that he was going to be a part of our family.
It felt good. It felt romantic. We got married in the convent.
I was the maid of honor at Tracy's wedding. Tracy got married at the Dominican Sister Mother House Chapel. We always described it as like being in The Sound of Music. Right in front of you was the Hudson River. It was a dream of my parents for us to get married there.
It was all marble, all white, and all the nuns were there. My limo broke down. We got to the church late, and one of Chris's friends told me that he was upset, he was worried because I was late. And that always made me feel happy, that he cared for me, that he loved me. That made me happy.
Soon, the newlyweds move into an apartment and settle into a routine.
He left the commercial offset printers and he worked for Texaco company, and then he got a job in IBM. I was teaching in Newburgh. I got hired in August of that summer, '84.
Chris works the night shift on an assembly line.
And so I was home every night by myself, and I hated that. My sister, Kelly, and my mom, we would go out shopping on Saturdays. So Friday nights, a lot of times I went and I slept at my parents' house.
Tracy finds her first year especially challenging.
The discipline was so tough on me. I remember cans of crayons being thrown over my head, and it was very, very difficult on me. He went to work with me crying in the bathroom, in the corner, hysterical, like having a nervous breakdown, because the behavior was so bad, and I couldn't get a handle on it. I didn't know what to do. If he gave me some love, some hugs, telling me it's going to be okay, I probably would have been great, because that's all I needed. But he didn't.
Tracy has her heart set on buying land and building her dream home, but it is difficult to save money. Chris gets a second job at a local business as a salesman.
He got a job at a woman's store with all women. And then women would leave notes on his car. It didn't matter if they were pretty, ugly, didn't matter what they looked like, he still flirted with them. Women shouldn't be leaving notes on his car. He's a married man.
Tracy complains to Chris about his flirting, but he doesn't stop.
He never hesitated telling Tracy that other women were looking at him. He did like to make her insecure, because then she clung on to him a little bit more, and he liked that attention.
After 4 years, they're no closer to buying a home, so Tracy and Chris come up with a new plan to save money.
We gave up the apartment, and I went to my parents' house, and he went to his parents' house. We lived off my paycheck and put his in the savings. I just never knew what he made. He never brought a paycheck home and showed me.
Tracy asked him if she could go stay at his parents as well. And he said there was no need for that, that she was better off in her house, in her own bedroom. We just thought it was all so weird. It was hard on the marriage, and Tracy cried a lot. She wanted to be with him, and he just kept saying to her, "You want a house, don't you? This is what we have to do to get the house."
For 2 years, Tracy and Chris continue their unusual arrangement, seeing each other as much as their busy schedules allow. Finally, their sacrifice pays off. They save enough to buy their own home, or at least Tracy does.
She has to pay for it all. We don't know where he would have the money saved for any of this.
We decided we were going to get a piece of land and put a modular home on there. We put a down payment on a home.
But before they break ground, in front of friends and family, Chris drops a bombshell that will ruin everything.
He told me he was in love with another woman. Her name was Shannon. He said that he was backing out of building a house. It was awful.
So Shannon was a woman who worked at the mall, who Tracy would see him talking to all the time, and never thought he would ever be with her. But what was even more shocking was Tracy's reaction to it. Tracy fell to her knees, held onto his leg, cried, and told him not to leave her.
Being a nice Catholic girl, you don't get divorced. I didn't know what to do.
Tracy Wygant's husband, Chris, has just told her he is having an affair with another woman.
Basically, what I did is put my head in the ground. It was sad. I didn't know where to turn, what to do. I didn't tell my friends.
He was done. But he wasn't done for her.
This is all I got. How am I going to get anything in the future if I don't fight for him?
6 months go by. Tracy continues to live at home, hoping Chris will eventually reconcile.
I had to go and get the money back for the down payment. There was no talk of divorce. And I would go to the church where we got married, and I would go in there by myself and just pray for everything to get better. And I would do that a lot.
And then one day, he shows up at her work unexpectedly.
And he had with him pamphlets for condos. So we started looking at condos. I was hopeful, because why would he do that?
Chris tells her he is no longer seeing the other woman.
I'm thinking everything's back, everything's fine. She doesn't exist anymore. It's done.
Tracy and Chris start afresh, and instead of buying a condo, they find another piece of land.
It's in Walk Hill area, out by the Schwanga Mountains, and we picked out a house from a magazine. It wasn't like he was like, being all sweet and nice. I just settled and just kept going.
Within a few months, Tracy finds out she's pregnant.
When you have a body grown inside of you, it's wonderful and weird at the same time. It was also a very difficult time. We're building a house, and I'm pregnant.
Chris, he's going to be the best. He's going to build a house. He's going to make it bigger and better than everybody else's. Did they have the money for it? No. He hired people he knew, then didn't pay them. They were in debt.
Just as they finish building their new house, their daughter Taylor is born in February 1991.
Come see baby Taylor. This is baby Taylor's first Easter.
She was just absolutely beautiful.
Taylor.
Long Goldilocks hair, gorgeous.
Oatmeal and banana.
Yum, 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 yum.
Tracy goes back to work after 3 months of maternity leave. Chris is on night shift, so he takes care of Taylor during the day.
Chris took Taylor to the zoo, the park. He would meet other people, women with children, and I'm sure that he was flirting with other women. He would fulfill that role of the mother and the father with Taylor, because Tracy was working.
If we were at my sister's for a picnic, he would be with all the kids, and he would knock the parents down and say, "Oh, I'm down here with their kids," like he was the greatest.
Santa Claus was here. Look at all your presents.
Daddy, can I open some?
Can you open them? Sure can. Merry Christmas. Where's my Merry Christmas kiss?
Years go by, and Taylor grows closer to her dad, who seems to do all the fun things.
Hey, you.
I think most of my field trips, my dad came on as the parent.
Hi, I'm Taylor, and I'm at Macy's Parade. This is the fireman.
During parties, you would find him in the pool with us, having fun. My dad was always involved, always playing with the kids.
Hey, good girl.
But Chris has little time for Tracy, and their marriage suffers.
He said, "I have a stomach, so no sex." That was awful. We did Nutrisystem, and I got really skinny, and he still said I had a belly.
We felt that he was having an affair because there was just really no desire, no connection. And it was frustrating for me because I knew my sister was believing his lies.
Inside, I'm dying. No intimacy. I would cry and I would beg him, and he would go like this at me. "Oh, really?"
When her sister Kelly's family visits Disney World, Tracy suggests they join them, hopeful that a vacation might rekindle their intimacy.
Tracy really looked forward to that. The whole family walking around Disney World.
We took out a loan to take Taylor. We were together, and one night I woke up in the middle of the night and he was gone. I don't know where he was.
She said that Chris kept disappearing. We would be waiting for the parade, and he'd say, "Oh, he's gonna go buy Taylor something," and he'd be gone for hours. She goes, "I just have a feeling that he wasn't alone."
I was hoping for a change. I just kept waiting for that miracle to happen.
After they return, and just when Tracy is at her emotional bottom, her sister calls with more devastating news.
She told me that our mom died.
My mom's death was awful for us.
Chris had no choice. He had to be with me during that time. And then I had him go up to the casket and tell my mom not to worry, that he always would be there for me. I had him tell her that. And then it was Thanksgiving weekend. My family has a cabin in the Catskills with a gun club. So Chris says he's going up to the cabin and go hunting. And my sister could not believe that he was leaving me after my mom just died.
He would tell my father that real men don't stay in the cabin. They go off and they get a tent and they sleep in the woods.
Chris and Tracy's dad go to the cabin, but Chris disappears.
Now, Chris had a hunting gun, but he didn't hunt.
And my father, he searched to see if he could find him. And he followed his tracks, and then they just stopped.
There was no tent. He disappeared.
Chris has been picked up on the road outside the cabin by another woman. Someone who Taylor has already met.
My first memory of meeting another woman was going to the Ulster County pool. My dad told me he was going to meet a friend of his from work, and she had a little girl with her too. We remember playing with all of them in the pool. She was a few years younger than me.
Taylor plays with the little girl named Megan on more than one occasion.
We went hiking together one time up in Minnewaska. It was definitely a few times he had me go meet her. He was treating both of us kind of the same. It was bothering me. And she kept calling him Dad.
Tracy's daughter Taylor meets another girl who is calling her father Dad.
He said that she didn't have a father of her own, so he was trying to step into that role for her. And then he would make me pinky swear not to tell my mom anything about what we did.
Taylor told me that her father and her went with this other woman to some falls up by Kingston, New York. And he has her pinky swear not to tell me. And then when I questioned him about it, he just said it was a friend he ran into.
Tracy's a smart person. And I think that somewhere inside, she definitely didn't believe him. But she was so afraid of bringing it to the surface because she didn't want the consequences of what would happen to their marriage.
I was waiting for things to get better. It would get better, it would get better. I hang in there.
I feel like at my private shower, like shower.
In February of 1998, Taylor celebrates her 7th birthday. By this time, everyone but Tracy seems to be on to Chris.
I think that's the last birthday I remember with my father being there.
We believe that he's living a double life. He is off buying things and telling my husband that he has charge cards that Tracy doesn't know about. And I think he's doing it just to add fuel to all of our fire.
By the time summer arrives, Tracy and Chris have not been intimate for over 4 years.
I thought he was gay for a while. There was a manager at IBM that he kept talking about that was gay, that he hung out with, and also the lack of sex for years. So it was making me think, well, geez, maybe he is gay. I did ask questions, but they were always lies. I was gagging and throwing up. That's how bad I was. Crying. Felt like I didn't have anybody in the world.
In September, at the start of the school year, Chris starts spending time alone in the garage. He tells Tracy that he is working on something special for her.
He said to me, I have a surprise for you. Don't tell your sister about it. And I told her, because I thought it was going to be something romantic.
She just was really excited about it. And I think she felt that it was going to make their marriage better.
I was excited. I couldn't wait for my surprise.
Chris even puts up garbage bags to black out the windows in the garage so that Tracy can't peek.
I heard noises. I don't know exactly what he was doing. We also bought unfinished furniture that he would paint and stain over the years. So it could be something like that. To me, he was working on my surprise. So I didn't want to open the door and ruin it and peek.
Hey, honey.
As the weekend approaches, Chris seems to be more flirtatious.
He picked me up, and I got embarrassed, and I got shy, and I asked him to put me down. He never picked me up before, never. And I was uncomfortable with that because I'm heavy. Within a few hours later, he had me move a ladder. And I thought it was strange that he didn't do it. He had me do it.
That's great. Great.
On the evening of September 12th, 1998, Chris, Tracy, and Taylor arrive home early from a dinner with friends.
He told me about the surprise. He was getting the surprise ready. And I went to the living room while he was out in the garage.
While Taylor sleeps upstairs, Tracy waits in anticipation.
He comes in and gets me and tells me the surprise is ready. He put a blindfold around my eyes, tightened it up.
Chris places an envelope in Tracy's hand.
He told me it was part of the surprise.
She thought maybe it was airline tickets, and she was hoping it was a trip.
And he had to help me out to the garage. I was okay with it because when somebody's going to surprise you, sometimes they do that. They put blindfold on you. He opens the door and then puts me at the first step. So I'm out on the first step. He's behind me. He tells me the surprise is not ready.
Chris leads Tracy back to the couch, removes the blindfold, and she waits again.
He comes back out to the living room and tells me the surprise is ready now. He had to do a couple things. So we go through the same routine. Opens the door, helps me down to the first step.
Come on this way.
It wasn't ready. Again.
No, it's not
We go
ready.
back in. I go right back to the couch.
Finally, the surprise is ready. Chris re-blindfolds Tracy and again places the envelope in her hand.
Now it's just quiet. And I can hear him breathing behind me. Now I'm starting to get suspicious. Now I'm starting to get a little nervous.
He leads her into the garage, and Tracy waits again for what seems like eternity.
My heart was pounding out of my chest. I felt something come down my neck.
Tracy Wygant's husband, Chris, has just slipped a noose over her head.
And my reaction was to hit it off. And I quickly hit the blindfold up off me and looked up, and he was above me, and he had big gloves on. And I saw him holding the rope with a noose. I went into an out of my body experience, like numb. Is this really happening? It could have been a diamond, it could have been a pearls, but it wasn't. It was a noose.
She was seconds away from death. Seconds. He was going to pull Tracy up by the noose. He was going to hold on to it until she was dead.
I looked up and I said to him, "What's going on?" And he let the noose go and he went to the corner of the garage. And he was crying. He said that he was in love with another woman and we have a child.
Tracy doesn't consider that she might still be in danger.
I thought about it more afterwards. Like, how stupid was I thinking that maybe he wouldn't take a gun and shoot me? He could have easily done that. I was shaking at this time and I said, "I'm going to call my sister."
We were sound asleep, and it was Tracy. She was crying hysterically and wanted me to come up there. Like now. I called my father and asked him to come up to Tracy's. And I said, it's bad news. I bet it's an affair again. I went to the front door and Chris opened the door. He looked disheveled, tired. He looked like a monster. I turned and saw Tracy sitting on the couch, and she was rocking, and she was crying. So I knelt down next to her, and I said, Tracy, what's going on? Tell me what's happening. And she said, he has another woman and a child. Her name is Megan. And I could tell she was trying to process it. And I turned to look at him, and I said to him, that was your surprise? This is your surprise?
Chris sees Tracy's father coming and leaves to go meet him outside.
That gave me the opportunity to say to Tracy, that was your surprise? And she said, no, he tried to hang me in the garage. At that point, I went into the garage area. The windows were all blackened out with black plastic bags. The ladder was standing there, and there was the noose.
She said, Tracy, I have to call the police. I'm begging her not to call the police.
Kelly calls 911.
Everything was definitely surreal that night. Everything seemed to go in slow motion.
Tracy tells Kelly that she asked Chris why he wanted to kill her.
And he said, you made me do this to you. And she said, why? What did I do? What did I do wrong? And he said, you made me do this. You would never let me go. This is bad. This is really bad. I'm very concerned about my sister because I think she's going to have a severe mental breakdown.
Tracy's dad is startled when police arrive on the scene.
And he said, why would you call the police? This is just an affair. And I looked at my father and I said, no, it's not, Dad. He tried to hang her in the garage. At that point, my father just leapt through the air and jumped on Chris. And that's when the police quickly grabbed my father and Chris.
The officers escort Chris into another room.
He was pacing and wringing his hands. He kept apologizing. He says, I wanted to do a double suicide. I wanted to kill my wife and then kill myself. I'm like, now you know that's not a double suicide. We call it murder-suicide. I said, well, how are you gonna kill yourself? He says, well, I got a gun. He showed me the gun. It was in a closet, all the way back in the closet. I found a .308 that was in there. I'm like, okay, where's the ammo? I don't know. Okay, and how are you going to off yourself with a gun if there's no ammo available? Something's not right.
Chris is arrested, but only for menacing and endangerment.
He had me move the ladder to get my prints on the ladder. Him having me hold the note was going to be a suicide letter. And he picked me up because he wanted to see how he could pull me to hang me. The police say when the surprise wasn't ready that he was trying to get his nerve up. If he did what he was going to do the first time, maybe even the second, he would have succeeded.
Tracy ended up in a psychiatric hospital.
It's like being hit with a double blow. The love of your life has just tried to kill you. You get out of it, and then he hits you with the other blow that kills your heart, it kills your soul.
The next morning, Kelly races to gain emergency custody of Taylor. before Chris makes bail. Tracy Wygant spends a week in a psychiatric hospital trying to understand why her husband tried to kill her.
He wanted to look like I committed suicide.
He wanted to look like the victim. Everybody would have been crying for him and feeling bad for him, and he would have came out victorious.
If Chris had succeeded, he would have avoided a custody battle for Taylor.
He would have got the house. He would have got money from the New York State Teachers Union. They would have been set and they would live happily ever after, the four of them in the house. That was his goal.
It was cheaper to pay for a funeral than a divorce lawyer. I believe she saved her own life.
Tracy would never have divorced him. Even after that night, I don't think she wanted to divorce him.
After Tracy returns home from the hospital, she gets full custody of Taylor and then searches the house for evidence of Chris's double life.
I found special holiday cards, letters, fake divorce papers, mail-in divorces.
I'm sure he was showing his girlfriend that he was going through a divorce.
Proof positive that Chris was seeing other women throughout their marriage.
One card I opened up and it was a Valentine's card and it had a voice. Happy, happy hard day. We love you very much. Love, Kathy and Taylor. So it was not good for me. So my family almost had to bring me back to the hospital. That was hard.
There was a photo of Shannon in Disney World, the same time that Tracy, Chris, and Taylor took their Disney World trip. So when he was disappearing, he was meeting Shannon.
February 5th, 1999, 5 months after the attack, a grand jury in Ulster County, New York, upgrades Chris's menacing charge to attempted murder in the second degree.
Usually, the one who is unhappy should be the one that takes a drastic measure. But he wanted to maximize his happiness. He wanted to have everything that they had built together to himself. So she was expendable to him.
Just over a year later, in 2000, they go to trial.
He sat there acting like he did nothing wrong. He was the perfect husband who wanted a divorce. That's it.
He told the jury that he was trying to tell me it was over.
His defense was he was just trying to scare her into a divorce because she never would have left him.
The last time I saw my dad was when we went to court, and it was just for a split second. I was set to testify, give my own statements, and I was halfway through the door, and the judge decided he didn't need my testimony, so I was immediately scooched back and out of the room.
Tracy and Kelly take the stand, but the evidence is airtight.
I was in a little bit of a fighting spirit at that time, but still very timid, still beaten up. It was tough with his lawyer, but I held my own.
What I think went wrong with Chris's plan was that he lost his nerve. But I also think that he could have done it.
By unanimous vote, a jury finds Chris Chanowitz guilty of attempted murder, and he is sentenced to 15 years in prison.
I was looking at him when I read my victim response for the sentencing. He wouldn't let me look at him because it was very heartfelt. I cried. Yeah, I was upset. I cried. I did that for a couple weeks.
Tracy and Taylor sell the house and start rebuilding their lives in a new home.
I am proud of how Tracy came out of this. For the last 25 years, She has built a little life for her and Taylor in this house. She has made it a showstopper. People stop and take pictures. She does gardening outside. And that has been her sanctuary.
After serving 13 years, Chris gets out of jail in 2013 and moves back to Wallkill.
I walk up in my front yard to go do something, and there he drives by. We make eye contact sometimes.
I was in Home Depot. I just happened to go around the corner, and there he was. And I started yelling for security. I said there was an attempted murder in the store, and security was running. I told him, you better leave. He almost killed my sister. I was screaming at him on top of my lungs, and he left.
Taylor rejects her father for what he did to her mother. And now Tracy is retired from teaching and has found new love.
Steve worked for the town of Newburgh. He was a fireman for over 50 years. He just loves me so much, and I love him. Matter of fact, I'm missing him right now. He's done so much for me. I hit the jackpot.
She finally has found the perfect man for her who wants to take care of her and who truly, truly loves her. I feel like I have my older sister back.
My mom's very funny. She enjoys goofing off, never really acts her age, always singing and dancing around the house, even if it can drive me crazy sometimes.
I'm able to do it because Steve's in my life. And that's given me the strength. And I think God knows now that I have the strength to do this.
The street was silent, the kind of silence that only exists just before dawn, when the world seems to hold its breath and even the wind hesitates to move. A single porch light flickered at the end of the block, casting a weak yellow glow across cracked pavement and forgotten mailboxes. Somewhere inside one of those dark houses, a phone would ring in less than an hour, and when it did, a 22-year nightmare would finally begin to surface. But in 2003, no one on this street knew what was coming. They only knew that something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong. It began on a humid July night in a quiet Texas town, a place where doors were rarely locked and strangers were noticed immediately. The kind of town where everyone knew your name, your habits, your routine. A town where nothing ever happened, until it did. Her name was Emily Carter, 17 years old, honor student, part-time waitress, small-town golden girl. She was last seen walking home from her shift at a roadside diner just after 10:30 p.m., her apron folded neatly under her arm, her phone battery nearly dead, her house only 6 blocks away. 6 blocks. A distance that should have taken less than 10 minutes. She never made it. By midnight, her parents were already calling friends, co-workers, neighbors. By 1 a.m, police cruisers began crawling through the neighborhood, headlights sweeping across front yards and alleyways, radios crackling in low, urgent tones. By sunrise, the town was awake, whispering, gathering, pointing, speculating. By noon, the words everyone feared were spoken aloud. Missing person. By evening, the phrase hardened into something colder, heavier, more permanent, potential homicide. Search teams combed through fields and drainage ditches. Dogs traced her scent down cracked sidewalks, across patches of dead grass, toward the narrow strip of woods bordering the highway. Her shoe was found near a shallow creek, soaked, half buried in mud. Then her phone, shattered, battery missing. Then nothing. No blood. No struggle. No witnesses. Just absence, stretching wider with every hour. The town fractured under the weight of uncertainty. Parents walked their children to school. Stores closed early. Porch lights stayed on all night. Rumors spread faster than facts. A white van, a stranger at the gas station, a drifter seen near the highway. None of it held. None of it stuck. The police questioned everyone. Friends, teachers, ex-boyfriends, co-workers, strangers passing through. But the answers circled back on themselves, tangled and incomplete, leading nowhere. And then there was the neighbor. His name was Daniel Hargrove, 32, quiet, polite, unmarried, lived alone in a small rental house 3 doors down from the Carter family. He worked nights at a local distribution warehouse, rarely spoke, rarely socialized. He waved when he passed, returned borrowed tools, mowed his lawn every Saturday morning. The kind of man people barely remembered until they needed to describe him. He told police he'd been at work during the time Emily vanished. His supervisor confirmed his shift. His coworkers remembered him clocking in. The cameras at the warehouse were outdated, grainy, unreliable, but nothing directly contradicted his story. He was questioned. He cooperated. He was cleared. For a while. Weeks turned into months. Months into years. Emily's face stared out from missing posters that slowly faded under the Texas sun. Candlelight vigils became annual rituals. Her bedroom stayed untouched, frozen in time, dust gathering gently across trophies, notebooks, half-read paperbacks. The case file thickened, then stalled. Leads dried up. Witness memories blurred. Evidence aged, boxed, shelved. The town learned to live with the unanswered question hanging over it like a permanent storm cloud. But some nights, when the air grew heavy and cicadas screamed from the trees, people swore they could still hear her footsteps on the sidewalk. Detectives rotated off the case. New officers skimmed old reports, shook their heads, and added nothing. Technology advanced. DNA databases expanded. Cold case units formed. Still, Emily Carter remained a name printed on yellowing paper, a photograph fading inside a plastic sleeve. Until, in early 2025, a single piece of forgotten evidence was rediscovered in a sealed box at the back of a police storage room, a fragment of fabric, darkened with age, tagged, logged, and never tested. It had been found tangled in low brush near the creek where her shoe surfaced. At the time, the lab backlog was enormous. Priorities shifted. The sample was deemed too degraded. The case moved forward without it. 22 years later, a young forensic technician, cataloging old evidence for digitization, flagged the item for retesting using modern extraction techniques. No one expected results. Everyone braced for disappointment. What came back instead was a full genetic profile. A profile that did not belong to Emily. The database search took seconds. The match took longer. Not because the DNA wasn't present, but because it had never been uploaded. No criminal record. No arrests. No convictions. No samples on file. The trail appeared to end in a blank space. But genealogy databases told a different story. Partial matches. Distant cousins. Family trees slowly reconstructed, branch by fragile branch, until a single name surfaced repeatedly. Daniel Hargrove. The quiet neighbor. The man who waved. The man who lived 3 doors down. The man who had never left town. By the time detectives arrived at his door, the sun was barely rising. His porch light still glowed faintly, just as it had on that night in 2003. When he opened the door, he looked older, heavier, slower. His hair thinned, his shoulders slumped. But his eyes carried the same guarded stillness they always had. He listened without interrupting. He nodded. He stepped aside. He did not ask why. Inside, the house smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. Nothing stood out. No hidden trophies. No locked rooms. No signs of panic. Just an ordinary life built carefully around a secret buried deep enough to survive 2 decades. In the interrogation room, he sat for 6 hours. He denied everything.
Calm, precise,
Rehearsed. He repeated his alibi. He explained the DNA as contamination, coincidence, mistake. But when investigators laid out the timeline, the warehouse time logs, the malfunctioning camera, the 10-minute gap that had once seemed meaningless, his story began to tremble. A pause here, a correction there, a detail altered, a memory suddenly uncertain. Then they showed him the fragment of fabric. The room went quiet. His breathing slowed. And for the first time, his eyes broke contact. What happened next would shock a community, reopen a wound that had never healed, and expose a darkness that had been hiding in plain sight for 22 years. But in that moment, all that existed was the silence, thick, suffocating, waiting to be shattered. The silence inside the interrogation room thickened, pressing down on every breath, every blink, every microscopic movement. The fluorescent lights hummed faintly overhead, casting a pale glow across the metal table where the fragment of fabric lay sealed inside a transparent evidence bag. Daniel Hargrove stared at it as though it were something alive, something capable of breathing, watching, remembering. His jaw tightened. A muscle flickered beneath the skin of his cheek. The room waited. Detectives had learned long ago that the moment before a confession rarely arrived with shouting or violence. It arrived with hesitation, with a fracture in certainty, with the smallest crack in a story repeated too many times. And in that fragile space, they pressed. They began again, not with accusations, but with memory. The summer of 2003. The heat. The cicadas. The smell of cut grass hanging in the evening air. They described the street. The porch lights. The quiet rhythm of small-town nights. They spoke Emily's name softly, letting it settle between them. They recounted her last known steps, the diner, the sidewalk, the creek. They painted the scene slowly, deliberately, rebuilding the night piece by piece, until the past felt dangerously close. Daniel shifted in his chair. His alibi had always been clean. Clock in at 10:47 p.m., clock out at 6:12 a.m. But now the warehouse manager from 2003 had come forward with a detail long dismissed as irrelevant. A faulty badge scanner. Occasional manual overrides. Paper logs filled in after the fact. On that night, Daniel's entry time had been written in pen, not stamped by the system. A small thing. A forgotten thing. Until it wasn't. The gap, 8 minutes. Just 8. Enough time to leave his house, intercept a girl walking alone, force her into a vehicle, and return to clock in. 8 minutes that shattered a story he had trusted for 22 years. The detective slid photographs across the table. Not graphic. Just context. The creek. The brush. The path her scent trail had followed before disappearing. They showed him aerial maps. Time stamps. Reconstruction models. And finally, a chart of genetic matches branching outward like veins, all leading back to him. Daniel swallowed. For a long time he said nothing. Outside the room, officers watched through one-way glass, barely breathing. No one spoke. No one moved. They had waited more than 2 decades for this moment, and now that it had arrived, it felt fragile, like it might vanish if acknowledged. Inside, Daniel exhaled slowly. "I didn't mean for it to happen," he said. The words fell quietly, but they detonated inside the room. He spoke without looking up, his voice steady, stripped of emotion, as though reciting something memorized long ago. He described seeing Emily that night, stepping off his porch to take out the trash, noticing her walking alone, her earbuds in, her head tilted downward. He said it felt impulsive, sudden, like something snapped. He claimed he only wanted to talk, to ask her something. But fear entered her eyes. She tried to run. He panicked. His hands moved faster than his thoughts. He remembered the weight of her body, the smell of grass, the sound of her breath catching. The details came in fragments, uneven and jagged. He admitted to dragging her into his car, to driving toward the creek, to the struggle, to the silence afterward. But when detectives asked where her body was, his voice faltered. "I don't remember," he whispered. The room froze. He claimed panic, claimed shock, claimed that his mind shut down, that memory collapsed under terror. He said he drove for hours, turned onto roads he didn't recognize, crossed county lines without knowing. He said the night blurred into darkness and headlights and empty highways. He said he left her somewhere remote, somewhere that never felt real. But there was no body, no remains, no closure. And without that final piece, the confession hovered between truth and incomplete confession, a half-open door that refused to fully reveal what lay beyond. The news broke by mid-morning. Texas, 2003 cold case cracked. Quiet neighbor arrested after 22 years. The headlines spread like wildfire. Phones lit up. News vans flooded the streets. Helicopters circled overhead. Reporters gathered outside the Carter home, outside the courthouse, outside Daniel's small rental house, now sealed behind police tape. The town stood still, stunned, disoriented, as though reality itself had tilted. Neighbors stepped onto porches, shielding their eyes from the sun, staring at a house they had passed 1,000 times without a second glance. People replayed conversations, borrowed tools, shared smiles, harmless greetings, now infected with dread. Mothers pulled their children close. Fathers clenched their fists. The realization settled slowly, painfully. The monster had never come from outside. He had always been here. Emily's parents received the call shortly after dawn. They had prepared themselves for decades for this moment, yet nothing could soften the impact. Her mother collapsed into a chair, hands trembling, breath broken. Her father stared at the wall, unmoving, eyes hollow, as though the words could not find a place to land. They had lived in limbo for so long that certainty itself felt unreal. Relief tangled with agony. Answers collided with grief. The wound reopened, raw and bleeding, even as justice finally stirred. But justice demanded more than words. Investigators launched an exhaustive search based on Daniel's fragmented recollections. They traced old traffic records, gas station receipts, highway cameras, toll booth logs. They reconstructed possible routes, overlaying his statements onto maps until patterns emerged. They focused on isolated areas, abandoned farmland, dried riverbeds, disused wells, forgotten service roads. Hundreds of volunteers joined the effort. Cadaver dogs combed fields. Drones swept over dense brush. Excavation teams dug into soil hardened by time. Each discovery, a scrap of cloth, a bone fragment, a rusted piece of metal, sent waves of hope and fear through the search crews. But day after day, nothing definitive surfaced. The land had swallowed her. And the longer the search continued, the more unsettling the possibility became that her remains might never be found, that her final resting place might remain forever unknown, that the last chapter of her story might be missing, just like the night she vanished. As the investigation deepened, darker questions surfaced. Had Daniel acted alone? Had he done this before? Had there been others? Cold case units across Texas began quietly reopening unsolved disappearances within a 200-mile radius, scanning timelines, locations, patterns. Forensic analysts compared DNA profiles against unidentified remains nationwide. The search widened. The shadow stretched. Inside his cell, Daniel remained silent. No interviews. No public statements. No visible emotion. He spent hours staring at the concrete wall, hands folded, posture rigid, as though still clinging to control over a narrative that had finally slipped beyond his grasp. The trial loomed, and with it, the possibility that more truths, darker, deeper, more horrifying, might still be buried beneath the surface. Because 22 years of silence rarely concealed just one secret. And as the town held its breath once more, one question echoed louder than all the others. Where is Emily? The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and recycled air, a sterile blend that masked nothing of the tension pooling beneath it. Rows of polished benches filled with journalists, officers, neighbors, and strangers drawn by the gravity of a story that had slept for 22 years before erupting back into public consciousness. At the center of it all, behind a pane of reinforced glass, sat Daniel Hargrove. His wrists were cuffed. His expression was blank. His eyes fixed forward, unblinking, as though staring into a horizon no one else could see. Outside, cameras flashed. Microphones clustered. Headlines multiplied by the hour. Texas, 2003 cold case cracked. Quiet neighbor arrested after 22 years. The words echoed across television screens, phone alerts, radio broadcasts, each repetition deepening the shock. But inside the courtroom, time slowed, thickened, as the machinery of justice creaked back to life. The prosecution began with the story everyone thought they already knew: the girl who vanished on a summer night, the neighborhood that searched, the town that waited, the decades that passed. But this time, the narrative didn't stop at disappearance. It moved forward, through the fracture in the alibi, through the rediscovered evidence, through the DNA that bridged past and present with merciless precision. They displayed maps, timelines, photographs, graphs. They reconstructed the night minute by minute, dismantling Daniel's carefully maintained version of events until it collapsed under its own contradictions. Then they brought out the witnesses. A former coworker testified that Daniel had arrived late that night, breathless, agitated, claiming car trouble. Another recalled him scrubbing his hands repeatedly in the warehouse restroom, skin reddened, knuckles raw. A retired dispatcher remembered a call placed from a payphone near the highway at 11:14 p.m., a man asking for directions back to town, his voice shaking, his words slurred. At the time, it had seemed trivial. Now, it pulsed with ominous relevance. The defense countered with doubt. Memory decay, suggestibility, coincidence. They challenged the DNA sample, questioned chain of custody, argued contamination, degradation, laboratory error. They portrayed Daniel as a scapegoat, a quiet man swallowed by a narrative too powerful to resist. They spoke of reasonable doubt, of the dangers of convicting on circumstantial evidence, of the irreversible cost of being wrong. But the weight of the story pressed heavily against those arguments. As the trial unfolded, investigators continued their parallel search for Emily's remains, driven by fragments of Daniel's confession and the growing suspicion that he had not told the full truth. They dug deeper into his past, peeling back layers of ordinariness to reveal patterns long overlooked. In 1998, a college student named Rachel Moore had vanished from a bus stop 40 miles north of town. In 2001, a 19-year-old waitress named Lauren Hayes disappeared while walking home from work in a neighboring county. Both cases had gone cold within months, buried beneath newer investigations, their names fading from public memory. Now, detectives laid those timelines over Daniel's employment records, his rental history, his credit card statements, his traffic violations. The overlaps were chilling. On the night Rachel vanished, Daniel had been off work. His cell phone records showed a call pinging a tower near the bus stop minutes before she was last seen. In Lauren's case, a gas receipt placed him within 5 miles of her disappearance zone less than an hour before she vanished. At the time, none of it had raised suspicion. Now, it suggested a pattern forming slowly, methodically, across years and jurisdictions. The possibilities surfaced quietly at first, whispered among detectives, unspoken in official briefings, that Emily Carter might not have been the first. Or the last. Cold case units across Texas and neighboring states reopened dozens of unsolved disappearances, cross-referencing timelines, locations, witness statements, and forensic evidence. Analysts searched for common threads, similar victim profiles, similar environments, similar windows of opportunity. A disturbing consistency emerged. Young women, walking alone, late evening, short distances, quiet neighborhoods, familiar routes. The same scenario, repeated. The realization rippled through law enforcement like an electric current. A single murder case was transforming into the potential exposure of a serial predator hidden in plain sight for decades. But proving it required something elusive: physical evidence. Detectives returned to Daniel's old residences, now occupied by new tenants, some long demolished, others renovated beyond recognition. They excavated backyards, drilled into concrete slabs, ripped apart floorboards. Cadaver dogs alerted in several locations, but soil samples revealed only trace organic matter, too degraded, too inconclusive to build charges. Every dig felt like grasping at ghosts. Then, in a cluttered storage unit rented under Daniel's name since 2002, investigators discovered a rusted metal toolbox hidden behind stacks of rotting furniture. Inside, wrapped in oil-stained cloth, lay a collection of items that froze everyone who saw them. Hair ties, earrings, a broken necklace, a denim button, a diner uniform patch. Each piece was catalogued, photographed, sealed. Each was subjected to forensic testing. DNA traces clung stubbornly to fibers preserved by oil and dust. And slowly, identities began to emerge. Not all of them, but enough. Rachel Moore, Lauren Hayes. Two names that had once belonged to missing posters and grieving families, now reattached to physical proof of their fate. The news exploded. A quiet neighbor, a suspected serial killer. The narrative darkened, deepened, mutated into something far more monstrous than anyone had imagined. The town that had once mourned a single lost girl now confronted the possibility that a predator had walked its streets undetected, watching, waiting, selecting. Fear reawakened. Parents checked locks. Schools added patrols. Late-night shifts went understaffed. Trust evaporated. Inside the courtroom, the mood shifted. Daniel's defense retreated, recalibrated, struggled to contain the damage. They attempted to suppress the newly discovered evidence, arguing a legal search, procedural errors, rights violations. The prosecution countered with warrants, consent forms, chain of custody logs. The judge allowed the items to stand. And with that ruling, the case tilted decisively. Emily's parents attended every session, sitting in the front row, hands clasped, eyes fixed on the man accused of stealing their daughter and so many others. Her mother flinched whenever her name was spoken. Her father's jaw remained locked, a muscle twitching beneath the skin. Their grief had aged them, carved lines deep into their faces, but beneath the exhaustion burned a relentless need for truth. Still, one piece remained missing. Emily's body. Without it, the story could never fully close. And as the trial moved toward its climax, investigators prepared for one final attempt to extract the location from Daniel, leveraging the mounting evidence, the looming life sentence, the certainty of conviction. They returned him to the interrogation room. Same chair, same table, same lights. This time, they brought photographs. The items from the toolbox. The faces of Rachel, Lauren, Emily. They laid them out in silence. Minutes passed. Then hours. Finally, Daniel spoke. But what he said would fracture the case all over again. The interrogation room felt smaller than before, as though the walls themselves had inched closer during the night. The air carried a stale metallic tang, the kind that lingered after hours of silence and restrained tension. Daniel Hargrove sat motionless, wrists cuffed to the table, eyes fixed on the scattered photographs laid before him. The faces stared back, frozen in moments stolen from happier times. Smiles, sunlight, youth, lives interrupted mid-breath. No one spoke. The detectives waited, knowing that silence could be sharper than accusation. It pressed against him, compressed his thoughts, stripped away the rehearsed phrases and practiced denials. His breathing grew shallow. His fingers twitched. A tremor ran through his jaw. Then, slowly, he closed his eyes. "They're not all there," he murmured. The words barely carried across the table. The lead detective leaned forward. "Who's not there, Daniel?" "The pictures," he said. "They're missing some." The room tightened. He inhaled deeply, as though gathering strength for a confession that had been rehearsed for decades in the darkness of his own mind. When he spoke again, his voice sounded hollow, detached, as if belonging to someone else. "I didn't plan it," he said. "Not the first time. I swear. It just happened. After that, it got easier. Too easy." The admission settled like a lead weight. He described a hunger that crept up on him slowly, a compulsion that sharpened with every act of control, every moment of fear reflected in another person's eyes. He spoke of routines, of patience, of watching from windows and parked cars, learning schedules, memorizing routes. He talked about opportunity, about the thrill of proximity, about the way ordinary life masked extraordinary cruelty. And then, at last, he spoke of Emily. He said he remembered the sound of her shoes on concrete, the rustle of her uniform, the faint glow of her phone screen illuminating her face. He said he followed at a distance, waiting for the stretch of road where the streetlights flickered and the houses thinned. He described the panic in her breath, the moment she realized she was no longer alone. He paused often, swallowing, his eyes darting away as if fleeing invisible memories. When they asked again about her body, his expression tightened. "I buried her," he said. The room froze. "Where?" He shook his head. "Not here. Not close. I drove for hours. I didn't want anyone to ever find her." Maps appeared. Aerial photographs. County grids. He pointed, hesitated, corrected himself, tracing uncertain lines through a web of highways and backroads. His memory fractured under pressure, blurred by time and trauma, but fragments surfaced. A dirt road. A rusted gate. The smell of cattle. A lone tree against the horizon. It was enough. Within hours, search teams were mobilized across 3 counties. Drones lifted into the sky. Helicopters thundered overhead. Convoys of vehicles poured down rural highways, fanning outward into farmland and scrubland that stretched endlessly beneath the sun. Ranch owners were contacted. Abandoned properties accessed. Old wells inspected. Dry creek beds excavated. The landscape was vast, merciless in its scale. Each location raised hope, then crushed it. Hours became days. Under the scorching Texas heat, volunteers pushed through waist-high grass, their boots churning up dust and bone-dry soil. Cadaver dogs worked tirelessly, noses low, tails stiff, alert to the faintest trace of decay lingering after 2 decades. Every alert sent shockwaves through the teams. Every false lead drained them further. And then, on the 3rd morning, near a cluster of gnarled mesquite trees bordering an abandoned cattle ranch, a dog stopped. It refused to move. The handler raised a clenched fist. The search froze. Excavators arrived. Shovels bit into hardened earth. Inch by inch, the ground gave way, revealing layers of sediment undisturbed for years. A scrap of fabric surfaced first, brittle, bleached, almost translucent. Then bone. The pit fell silent. Forensic teams took over, working with surgical precision, brushing away dirt, documenting every fragment, every fiber. The remains were incomplete, scattered, damaged by time and exposure, but unmistakably human. A small silver necklace emerged, its chain corroded, its charm engraved with a single initial. E. Emily. The confirmation arrived late that night. The town gathered in stunned quiet. Church bells rang softly. Candles burned in windows. Families held each other in long, wordless embraces. Grief surged anew, but beneath it flowed a painful sense of release. The waiting was over. The question of where she lay had been answered. But the price of that answer, the finality of her death, cut deeper than anyone expected. For Emily's parents, the news landed like a physical blow. They wept openly, their bodies folding under the weight of 22 years of suspended hope. Yet alongside their agony, a fragile peace took root. They could bring her home. They could lay her to rest. They could speak her name beside a grave instead of into empty air. But the discovery triggered another chilling realization. If Daniel had buried Emily so far from town, if he had driven hours into remote terrain, then how many other graves might still lie hidden across the landscape? Under renewed interrogation, he spoke of more sites. Some vague. Some disturbingly precise. Fields. Forests, abandoned wells. Dry riverbeds. Each confession sent teams racing into new territories, expanding the scope of the search until it spanned across state lines. Some remains were found. Others never were. And with every recovery, the story darkened. The victims were younger than anyone had suspected, some as young as 16, others barely out of their teens. Lives erased before they could unfold, dreams extinguished before they had formed. Families left suspended in permanent uncertainty, now forced to confront the truth after decades of not knowing. The case exploded into national headlines. A serial predator, hiding in plain sight. A town transformed into a crime scene. A neighbor revealed as a monster. Investigative journalists descended, digging into every corner of Daniel's past. They unearthed childhood trauma, reports of animal cruelty, disciplinary issues at school, a pattern of social withdrawal, and violent fantasies recorded in long-forgotten therapy notes. Each revelation added another layer to the portrait of a man shaped by darkness and left unchecked by systems too fragmented to connect the dots. The trial resumed under a cloud of suffocating intensity. Prosecutors now sought multiple life sentences. The defense shifted strategy, pivoting toward mental illness, diminished responsibility, psychological compulsion. Expert witnesses testified about antisocial personality disorder, paraphilic disorders, trauma-induced dissociation. They argued that Daniel's mind was broken long before his crimes began. But the jury listened, stone-faced. They saw photographs. They heard recordings. They absorbed testimony from families who had waited decades for answers. And slowly, inexorably, their verdict took shape. Yet even as the legal machinery advanced toward resolution, one question refused to fade. Had all of his victims been found? Or did the land still hold more secrets? As night fell over the quiet Texas plains, searchlights continued to sweep across empty fields, their beams cutting through darkness in relentless arcs, chasing echoes, hunting shadows, unwilling to accept that the full truth had already been unearthed. Because some crimes, once uncovered, revealed depths that seemed to have no bottom. And this story was far from over. The courtroom felt charged, as though the air itself carried an electric current. Every seat was filled, every aisle crowded. Journalists leaned forward, pens hovering, cameras poised, waiting for the smallest shift in expression, the faintest tremor of emotion. Outside, satellite trucks lined the streets. Inside, silence ruled, dense and absolute, broken only by the slow rhythm of breathing and the faint creak of wooden benches. This was the day the prosecution would reveal everything. Daniel Hargrove was escorted in under heavy guard, chains clinking softly with each step. His face remained blank, but the rigid set of his shoulders betrayed a tension he could no longer fully contain. He avoided the gallery, avoided the families, avoided the eyes of Emily's parents, who sat motionless in the front row, their grief now sharpened into something hard and unyielding. The lead prosecutor rose. His voice cut through the silence like a blade. He began with Emily, not with her death, but with her life, her laughter, her dreams, her plans to leave town, to study nursing, to build a future beyond the limits of quiet streets and familiar faces. He spoke of her kindness, her optimism, her stubborn belief in the goodness of people. And as he spoke, her photograph appeared on the screen behind him, radiant, alive, a devastating contrast to the story that followed. He traced her final steps. The diner, the sidewalk, the moment she realized she was being followed, the fear, the struggle, the silence. Then he widened the lens. Rachel Moore, Lauren Hayes, and others whose names were only now emerging from decades of obscurity. Each story unfolded with chilling similarity. Each timeline mirrored the last. Each disappearance followed the same pattern. Young women, familiar routes, late hours, brief windows of opportunity. The prosecution layered these narratives with forensic evidence, DNA matches, fiber analysis, soil composition, tool markings, geographic profiling, weaving them into a single, horrifying tapestry. This was not coincidence. This was repetition. This was ritual. Expert witnesses took the stand. A behavioral profiler described the psychological architecture of a predator who thrived on control, who selected victims not at random but through careful observation, who embedded himself within the fabric of the community to avoid suspicion. A forensic genealogist explained how trace DNA preserved for decades could now resurrect truths long buried. A digital analyst detailed how archived phone pings and transaction logs reconstructed movements thought lost to time. Each testimony tightened the noose. But the most devastating moment came when the prosecution introduced Daniel's recorded confession. The courtroom lights dimmed. The screen flickered to life. His voice filled the chamber, calm, detached, disturbingly composed, recounting acts of violence with clinical precision. He described the thrill of anticipation, the surge of power, the silence afterward. He spoke of victims as objects, as moments, as experiences to be collected and stored. He spoke of fear as something he could almost taste. The gallery stiffened. Several jurors looked away. Emily's mother wept openly, her sobs echoing in the cavernous room. Her father remained rigid, his hands clenched so tightly that his knuckles blanched white. When the recording ended, the silence that followed felt heavier than any sound. The defense rose slowly. Their strategy had narrowed to a single thread: mental illness. They presented psychologists who testified about Daniel's traumatic childhood, chronic neglect, emotional isolation, and early behavioral disturbances. They spoke of compulsion, of disordered attachment, of a mind fractured long before his crimes began. They argued that he did not fully understand the gravity of his actions, that his capacity for moral judgment had been compromised, that his impulses overwhelmed his restraint. They asked for mercy. But mercy is a fragile concept in the presence of such darkness. The prosecution countered swiftly. They showed evidence of meticulous planning, of concealment, of evasion, of calculated manipulation. They demonstrated how Daniel adapted after each crime, refining his methods, minimizing risk, learning from near mistakes. They argued that his actions revealed not madness, but intent, a sustained, deliberate campaign of violence carried out over years.
Control.
Awareness.
Choice.
The jury listened. They watched. They absorbed. Days blurred together as testimony piled upon testimony, each layer deepening the horror, each revelation stripping away any lingering doubt. Outside, the town transformed. Vigils erupted nightly. Flowers blanketed courthouse steps. Photographs of missing daughters and sisters reappeared in windows, held aloft by families who now dared to hope for answers. Strangers embraced in the streets. Old wounds reopened. Long-buried grief surged to the surface. And through it all, one truth settled heavily upon everyone: they had lived beside a monster and never known. When closing arguments arrived, the courtroom felt suspended in time. The prosecution spoke of accountability, of justice delayed but not denied, of lives that deserved recognition, remembrance, dignity. They urged the jury to see beyond sympathy, beyond psychology, beyond explanation, and deliver a verdict that honored the dead. The defense spoke of brokenness, of tragedy multiplied, of the dangers of vengeance masquerading as justice. They asked the jury to spare his life, to sentence him to imprisonment rather than death. Then the jury retired. Hours passed. Then days. The town waited. Every news outlet carried live updates. Every cafe television remained tuned to the courthouse steps. Social media pulsed with speculation, fear, anger, hope. Finally, on the fourth evening, the jury returned. The courtroom packed once more, tension vibrating through every bench, every aisle, every breath. The foreperson stood.
Guilty.
On all counts. The words rippled outward, colliding with sobs, gasps, muffled cries. Emily's mother collapsed into her husband's arms. Families of other victims clutched photographs to their chests, tears streaking down faces etched with exhaustion and relief. Daniel showed no reaction.
No flinch. No tremor.
No visible response. He stared straight ahead, as though the verdict belonged to someone else. The judge sentenced him to multiple consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. A life measured in walls, locked doors, and permanent isolation. As he was led away, cameras captured a final glimpse of his face, impassive, distant, unreadable. Yet for many, the verdict brought only partial closure. Because even with justice delivered, the echoes of his crimes continued to ripple outward. Search teams still combed remote regions. Families still waited for confirmation. And in quiet bedrooms across Texas, parents lay awake, haunted by the realization that evil can wear the face of normalcy, that danger can live next door, that the line between safety and terror is far thinner than anyone wants to believe. The trial had ended. but the story had not. Because some shadows do not disappear when the lights are turned back on. They simply retreat, waiting to be remembered. The verdict did not bring silence. It brought a different kind of noise, the low, constant hum of trauma settling into the bones of a town that would never again feel entirely safe. In the days following Daniel Hargrove's conviction, the streets of that quiet Texas community felt altered, as though an invisible fault line had split the familiar landscape into before and after. Houses stood the same. Trees cast the same shadows. But beneath the surface, something fundamental had shifted. People spoke in hushed voices. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Parents watched their children with a vigilance that bordered on fear. Ordinary routines, morning walks, evening jogs, late-night shifts, suddenly felt reckless, almost dangerous. The illusion of security had been stripped away, replaced by the chilling awareness that evil could hide in plain sight for decades, blending seamlessly into everyday life. Emily Carter was finally laid to rest beneath a pale summer sky. The funeral drew mourners from across the state. Hundreds gathered, filling the small cemetery beyond capacity. White flowers blanketed her casket. Letters, photographs, handwritten notes were tucked gently between petals. Her classmates, now adults with families of their own, stood shoulder to shoulder, faces streaked with tears, haunted by the memory of a girl who had never been allowed to grow up beside them. Her mother spoke only once, her voice trembling but steady. "We waited 22 years to say goodbye," she said. "No one should have to wait that long." And yet, for many families, the waiting was not over. The revelations surrounding Daniel's crimes had reopened dozens of unresolved cases, scattering investigative teams across multiple counties and states. Cold case units worked around the clock, re-examining evidence that had once seemed hopeless. Every missing persons file from the past 3 decades was scrutinized for overlaps, similar routes, similar victim profiles, similar time frames. The work was slow, exhausting, relentless. And with each new discovery, the scale of Daniel's violence grew more horrifying. In an abandoned quarry 50 miles north, human remains were unearthed beneath layers of rock and debris. DNA confirmed the identity of a 16-year-old runaway reported missing in 1996. Her family, long resigned to uncertainty, received the call in stunned disbelief. Grief struck with the force of something newly inflicted, even though the wound itself was decades old. In a dry riverbed near the state border, fragments of bone and fabric were recovered, matching a 19-year-old college freshman who vanished while jogging in 2000. Her father, who had spent years organizing volunteer searches, collapsed when informed, his body unable to absorb the weight of confirmation. Each discovery followed the same cruel rhythm. Hope, fear, truth, devastation. Investigators came to suspect that Daniel's full victim count might never be known. Some remains had likely been scattered beyond recovery, consumed by wildlife, eroded by weather, buried beneath development. Others may still lie undiscovered in places no search team would ever think to look. The land had become a silent accomplice, absorbing secrets without protest. Inside prison walls, Daniel remained largely uncooperative. He answered direct questions with clipped responses, offered vague descriptions when pressed, and retreated into silence when the subject turned toward numbers. How many? How often? How long? He never gave a total. Psychologists who evaluated him described a man deeply invested in control, even now. By withholding information, he retained power over investigators, families, the narrative itself. Each unanswered question became another form of domination, another way to extend his reach beyond steel bars and concrete walls. Yet cracks occasionally surfaced. During a routine session, he murmured, almost to himself, "There are places they'll never find." The statement ignited fresh urgency. Search parameters expanded again. Rural landowners were contacted. Old industrial sites were excavated. Cave systems were explored. Even abandoned storm tunnels were mapped and inspected. But the vastness of the terrain dwarfed every effort. The deeper investigators dug, the more they confronted a sobering reality. the truth, in its entirety, might be forever inaccessible. And so, the story shifted. From resolution to reckoning. From justice to aftermath. For the town, healing proved elusive. Counseling services overflowed. School districts implemented new safety protocols. Community meetings turned into collective therapy sessions, where neighbors confessed fears they had never before voiced. Survivors of past assaults came forward, their memories stirred awake by the case, their silence finally broken. Some recognized Daniel's face. A glance held too long. A comment that felt wrong. A presence that triggered unease without explanation. Moments dismissed in the past as awkwardness now reevaluated through the lens of horror. Trust fractured. Every unfamiliar face became a potential threat. Every quiet neighbor a possible suspect. The case had not only exposed a killer, it had altered the way people perceived one another. Across the nation, the story sparked renewed attention toward cold cases. Funding increased. Forensic labs received modern equipment. Genealogical DNA analysis surged, unlocking investigations once considered permanently stalled. Families who had long abandoned hope felt it cautiously return, fragile but real. In that sense, Emily's death and the others had ignited change. But no reform, no technology, no legal victory could restore what had been stolen. Lives. Futures. Possibility. One evening, months after the verdict, Emily's father stood alone outside their home, staring at the sidewalk where his daughter had last been seen. The concrete had been replaced. The streetlights upgraded. The neighborhood repaved. Yet in his mind, time remained fixed, locked forever at 10:32 p.m., July 2003. He imagined her footsteps, her laughter, her voice calling his name. And in that quiet moment, he understood a truth shared by every family touched by the case. Closure is a myth. There is only learning to live beside the absence. As seasons turned, the frenzy surrounding the trial gradually faded from headlines. New stories emerged. New tragedies captured attention. But beneath the shifting news cycle, the scars remained. In prison, Daniel aged rapidly. His hair whitened. His posture curved inward. Yet even as his body deteriorated, his mind clung stubbornly to its secrets. He wrote occasionally fragments of thoughts, cryptic phrases, references to locations no one could decode. Investigators pored over every scrap, chasing faint hints across maps and satellite images, rarely finding more than empty terrain. Sometimes, late at night, detectives wondered whether he was telling the truth, whether there really were more graves, or whether the suggestion itself was another manipulation, a final act of cruelty designed to keep hope alive only to extinguish it again. The uncertainty gnawed at them. At everyone. Because unanswered questions possess a terrible gravity. They pull at the mind. They distort memory. They refuse to settle. And in the space between what is known and what is suspected, fear takes root. Years passed. The town slowly rebuilt its routines. New families moved in, unaware of the full depth of what had occurred. Children rode bicycles along streets once haunted by disappearance. Life, relentless in its forward motion, reclaimed the surface of normalcy. But beneath that surface, the echoes endured. In the rustle of leaves at dusk, in the distant bark of a dog, in the hum of streetlights flickering to life. Reminders that evil does not always arrive with warning. Sometimes it grows quietly, patiently, unnoticed until it is too late. And sometimes, even when it is finally caught, it leaves behind a darkness that no verdict can fully erase. Time did not soften the story. It sharpened it. Years after the trial, long after the last television crew packed up and the final headline faded from public memory, the echoes of the case still pulsed beneath the surface of everyday life. The town resumed its routines, school buses tracing familiar routes, shop doors chiming open each morning, children playing beneath the same streetlights that once illuminated fear, yet a permanent tension lingered, invisible but omnipresent, like a low-frequency hum beneath every sound. The past refused to stay buried. Investigators continued to receive tips. Some came from families who had lost loved ones decades earlier and now saw eerie parallels. Others arrived anonymously, cryptic messages, hand-drawn maps, fragments of memory from people who claimed to have crossed paths with Daniel years before. Most led nowhere. A few reopened wounds that had barely begun to scar. One letter arrived without a return address, postmarked from a small town nearly 200 miles away. Inside was a single sentence, written in careful block letters. He stopped near our farm the night my sister disappeared. Detectives followed the lead, interviewing aging witnesses, retracing forgotten roads, scanning overgrown fields that stretched endlessly beneath open skies. They found nothing conclusive, but the possibility lingered that the full perimeter of Daniel's crimes might extend far beyond what anyone had yet imagined. Each new lead carried both hope and dread. Hope for answers. Dread for what those answers might reveal. In prison, Daniel grew increasingly withdrawn. He declined interviews, refused psychological evaluations, spent long hours staring at the blank wall of his cell. Guards reported that he rarely spoke, that his eyes followed movements with unsettling intensity, that he flinched at sudden noises. Yet occasionally, without warning, he would scribble notes on scrap paper, cryptic lines that hinted at places, numbers, fragments of geography. Most made no sense. Some led to empty locations. A few pointed investigators toward remote areas already searched. Whether these fragments represented genuine memory or deliberate manipulation remained impossible to determine. The families waited. Every call from law enforcement reignited hope, only to let it fade again. They learned to live in a state of emotional suspension, balanced precariously between grief and anticipation. For them, time did not move forward. It circled endlessly around unanswered questions. Where exactly?
How many? Why?
The psychological toll rippled outward. Support groups formed, uniting families bound by shared trauma. In church basements and community halls, they gathered to speak names long unspoken, to hold photographs that had become sacred relics, to remind one another that their loved ones had existed beyond their final moments. These gatherings became rituals of survival, fragile sanctuaries against the relentless pull of despair. For Emily's parents, life narrowed to small, deliberate motions. Morning coffee, evening walks, careful conversations. They rarely spoke of the night she vanished, yet her presence lingered in every room of their home, in the untouched bookshelf, in the faded posters tucked inside drawers, in the soft indentations still visible on her pillow. They visited her grave weekly, sometimes daily. Standing before the simple headstone, they whispered updates about the world she never got to see. New nieces, new nephews, graduations, marriages, seasons turning. They spoke as though she might answer, as though time itself might bend and grant them one impossible moment. Across the state, other families followed similar rituals, tethering themselves to memory in the absence of certainty. The land, too, carried the burden of what it concealed. Search teams returned to remote regions year after year, guided by new technology and fading recollections. Ground-penetrating radar scanned soil once considered impenetrable. Satellite imagery detected subtle depressions invisible to the naked eye. Artificial intelligence analyzed terrain patterns, predicting where disturbed Earth might lie. And sometimes they found something. A fragment of bone. A scrap of fabric. A piece of jewelry dulled by decades underground. Each discovery triggered a familiar cycle: forensic analysis, genetic comparison, notification, grief. The map of confirmed victims slowly expanded. Yet with each addition, the shadows lengthened. The list of the missing remained far longer than the list of the found. Late one night, during a routine review of Daniel's archived statements, a junior analyst noticed something others had overlooked: a series of repeated words scattered across multiple interviews, seemingly random, meaningless. When aligned chronologically, the words formed a pattern: names of highways, fragments of mile markers, references to water, stone, elevation. A hidden code. Investigators reconstructed the sequence, overlaying it onto regional maps. A path emerged, winding through isolated terrain toward a stretch of land long abandoned, once used for industrial mining before being sealed and forgotten. The site lay beyond public roads, accessible only by a series of deteriorating trails. Satellite images revealed collapsed structures, flooded pits, and deep subterranean cavities, a location uniquely suited to concealment. The search began quietly. No press, no announcements, just a convoy of unmarked vehicles rolling through dawn mist, carrying forensic teams, engineers, and excavation specialists. They worked methodically, stabilizing tunnels, pumping out stagnant water, reinforcing unstable rock. Every step carried risk. Deep inside one of the flooded shafts, sonar equipment detected irregular shapes. The water was drained. The descent began. What they recovered defied preparation. Personal effects. Fragments of clothing. Remnants of human remains scattered across sediment layers, suggesting repeated disposal over many years. The scale was overwhelming. As the analysis unfolded, identities emerged slowly, painstakingly, one genetic match at a time. The site had not been used for a single burial. It had been used again and again. A graveyard hidden beneath industrial ruin. The discovery shattered any lingering illusions about the scope of Daniel's crimes. The narrative shifted irrevocably from singular horror to systematic annihilation. Investigators revised estimates, bracing for a final count that might never truly settle. The announcement, when it finally came, struck the nation like a physical blow. Families flooded hotlines. Old missing person reports resurfaced. Cold cases once dismissed as unsolvable surged back into focus. The darkness had stretched far beyond one town, beyond one state, beyond one generation. And at its center sat a man who now refused to speak at all. In his silence, investigators heard a final act of control. By withholding truth, he maintained power. By denying closure, he prolonged suffering. By retreating inward, he ensured that some secrets would die with him. Yet even as the revelations multiplied, a strange quiet began to descend. Not peace, not resolution, but something else, a sober reckoning with the fragility of safety, the limits of certainty, the capacity for evil to thrive undetected within ordinary lives. The case reshaped protocols nationwide. Missing persons reports were treated with new urgency. Community surveillance systems expanded. Public awareness campaigns intensified. Families were encouraged to trust instincts, to question assumptions, to reject complacency. But no measure could fully eliminate fear. Because the story had taught a lesson too profound to ignore, that monsters rarely announce themselves. They integrate. They observe. They wait. And sometimes they succeed for far longer than anyone wants to believe. As years slipped forward, the headlines faded, but the echoes endured. In the flicker of porch lights at dusk, in the pause before answering a knock at the door, in the instinctive glance over one's shoulder when walking alone, the town, the families, the investigators, all carried fragments of the same unspoken understanding. That some mysteries, even when partially solved, never truly end. They only change shape. And somewhere in the vastness of forgotten land, the final secrets of the Texas 2003 cold case still lie in wait, silent, patient, refusing to be completely uncovered. The years that followed did not bring peace. They brought adjustment, a slow, painful recalibration to a reality that no longer resembled the world anyone thought they knew. The revelation of the hidden burial site, the scale of the crimes, the depth of deception, all of it reshaped lives in ways that could never be undone. For the families, time fractured. Some days passed in a blur, while others dragged endlessly, heavy with memory. They learned to mark anniversaries not by birthdays or holidays, but by dates of disappearance, discovery, confirmation. Each year carried its own emotional gravity, pulling them backward even as life demanded they move forward. Rachel Moore's mother began leaving her porch light on every night, a habit formed long before her daughter was confirmed dead. When neighbors finally convinced her to turn it off, she refused. "Just in case," she whispered. Lauren Hayes' younger brother, now older than his sister ever became, avoided mirrors. He said her face surfaced in a reflection, a reminder of time stolen, of years she never lived. He moved across the country, changed his name, severed ties, yet the past followed, stitched invisibly into his skin. Emily's parents sold their house. They could no longer bear the echoes. Every hallway whispered memory. Every window reflected absence. They relocated to a quieter town, hoping distance might dull the ache. But grief does not obey geography. It traveled with them, embedded in small rituals. The way her mother still set an extra plate at dinner, the way her father paused at crosswalks, scanning crowds for a face he knew he would never see again. For the town, healing unfolded unevenly.
Some sought therapy.
Others buried themselves in work. A few turned to alcohol, to silence, to isolation. The collective trauma seeped into everyday interactions, eroding trust, warping perception. Neighbors scrutinized one another. Strangers were viewed with suspicion. Even kindness became suspect, filtered through a lens of learned caution. Children absorbed these fears without understanding their origin. They learned never to walk alone, never to trust too easily, never to assume safety. The innocence once taken for granted vanished quietly, replaced by vigilance far beyond their years. Schools introduced trauma counselors. Teachers received specialized training. Emergency drills became routine. Community watch programs expanded, their signs sprouting across lawns like defensive talismans. And yet, beneath all of it, uncertainty persisted. Because Daniel never spoke again. His silence became a void into which questions endlessly fell. Investigators continued their searches, chasing faint leads, decoding fragmented notes, scanning endless miles of terrain. Occasionally, a discovery reignited hope, but more often, the land yielded nothing, guarding its secrets with relentless indifference. Each unsuccessful search chipped away at morale, at belief, at endurance. Even seasoned detectives began to falter under the psychological weight. Many transferred. Some retired early. Others carried the case into every sleepless night, haunted by faces they had never met, by stories that never fully concluded. The phrase "unsolved within solved" became an unspoken descriptor, a case technically closed, yet emotionally unresolved. And in that unresolved space, the imagination ran wild. Rumors circulated. Conspiracy theories blossomed. Some believed accomplices existed, hidden, uncharged, silently complicit. Others insisted additional burial sites remained undiscovered, their locations known only to Daniel and the earth. A few speculated that certain confessions were fabrications, manipulations designed to prolong attention and control. No theory brought comfort. Each only deepened unease. Inside prison, Daniel aged in isolation. His cell became his entire universe: steel, concrete, fluorescent light. Guards observed him slipping slowly into frailty. His movements slowed. His posture stooped. His eyes dimmed, though they still carried a glint of awareness, of calculation. Psychologists continued to request interviews. He refused. Clergy attempted outreach. He declined. Letters from families went unanswered, stacked unread in administrative offices. It was as though he had retreated entirely inward, sealing himself off from the world he had shattered. Yet sometimes, in the quiet hours before dawn, he whispered. Guards reported hearing fragments of speech drifting through the corridor, murmured names, half-formed phrases, broken recollections. But when confronted, he denied everything. Whether these moments reflected guilt, memory, or mere cognitive decline remained uncertain. Across the nation, the case reshaped public discourse. True crime media dissected every detail, turning tragedy into serialized fascination. Podcasts, documentaries, books, all sought to unravel the psychology, the timeline, the missed warning signs. Some approached with sensitivity. Others veered into exploitation, drawing criticism from families who felt their suffering had been transformed into spectacle. Emily's mother watched one documentary before turning it off midway. "They keep asking why," she said softly. "But there is no why that makes this make sense." In universities, criminology courses adopted the case as a study in long-term predation, highlighting the systemic failures that allowed Daniel to evade detection for decades. Law enforcement agencies revised protocols. Interagency communication systems improved. Data sharing expanded. New databases emerged, connecting isolated reports into cohesive analytical frameworks. Yet progress carried its own haunting implication. How many other stories like this remained hidden? How many quiet streets harbored unseen darkness? The question lingered, unanswered, unsettling. One autumn afternoon, a construction crew breaking ground for a new housing development uncovered skeletal remains. For hours, fear surged. Had another burial site been found? But forensic analysis revealed the bones dated back over a century, relics of forgotten settlement. The relief that followed felt disturbingly misplaced, a grim reflection of how accustomed people had become to expecting horror. The psychological landscape had shifted permanently. Normalcy, once effortless, now required conscious effort. Years layered atop years. Memories blurred. New generations grew up knowing the story only as history, a cautionary tale told by parents and teachers. For them, Daniel Hargrove became less a person and more a symbol, a reminder that danger could wear familiar faces, that safety was never absolute. But for those who lived through it, the past remained present. It surfaced in dreams, in sudden panic, in moments of inexplicable sadness, and sometimes in quiet gratitude for ordinary days unmarred by tragedy. Because in the aftermath of such devastation, even mundane peace becomes precious. Yet the greatest burden remained the unknown, the unanswered, the unresolved. How many victims? Where exactly? Who else? These questions hovered like specters, refusing to fade. And as Daniel's health declined, the possibility of ever obtaining full answers receded further, slipping slowly beyond reach. Time, relentless and impartial, marched forward. But it carried the weight of unspoken truths, of buried memories, of stories that might never fully emerge. And in that silence, the case found its final shape, not as a neatly concluded narrative, but as an enduring echo, a reminder of how fragile certainty truly is, and how profoundly a single hidden life can alter the course of countless others. The prison infirmary smelled of antiseptic and stale air, a sterile stillness clinging to every surface. Machines hummed in low mechanical rhythms, measuring breaths that came thinner with each passing day. Daniel Hargrove lay beneath harsh fluorescent light, his body reduced to brittle bone and fragile skin, his hands trembling faintly as though struggling to remember their former strength. Time was finally winning. Doctors estimated months, maybe less. And with that prognosis, urgency returned like a sudden storm. For investigators, this was the final window, the last chance. If Daniel died in silence, the unanswered questions would become permanent ghosts, embedded forever in the land and in memory. Families would never know the full truth. The map of hidden graves would remain incomplete. The story would fracture, unresolved. A federal task force assembled once more, pulling veterans from retirement, analysts from distant agencies, forensic experts whose careers had been shaped by this case. Their mission was singular: extract whatever fragments of truth still lingered inside the failing mind of a dying man. They approached carefully. No accusations. No confrontation. No demands. Only memory. They spoke of childhood, of early days, of moments before everything collapsed. They invited him to talk, not about crimes, but about himself. At first, he remained distant, detached, drifting in and out of consciousness. But as his body weakened, something in his posture softened. The walls he had built for decades began to crack, not from remorse, but from exhaustion. One evening, long after sunset, when the ward had grown quiet and shadows stretched across the floor, he spoke. Not to the detectives, but to the darkness. "I didn't think I would live this long," he whispered. The words barely carried. A recorder clicked on. He spoke of youth, of isolation, of feeling invisible, of resentment fermenting into obsession. He described an internal world filled with fantasies so vivid they felt inevitable. He said control was the only sensation that ever made him feel real. Then, slowly, he began to talk about places. He mentioned roads no longer on maps, landmarks erased by development, old industrial corridors sealed decades earlier. He spoke in fragments, disjointed, yet consistent enough to suggest buried coherence. Investigators leaned in, capturing every syllable. Maps filled white bars. Coordinates multiplied. Geographic analysts plotted routes, reconstructing forgotten infrastructure, overlaying historical records onto satellite imagery. A new pattern emerged, one that extended beyond previously searched regions, into terrain dismissed as irrelevant. An abandoned rail corridor, decommissioned in the late 1980s, cutting through remote stretches of scrubland and industrial wasteland. Along its route lay collapsed tunnels, drainage culverts, and sealed service chambers, forgotten spaces, inaccessible to casual exploration, perfect for concealment. Search teams mobilized again. This time, they traveled quietly, without public announcement, driven by the fragile hope that something final might still be recovered. The corridor stretched for miles, overgrown, rusted, partially swallowed by vegetation and neglect. Crews worked methodically, mapping structural weak points, stabilizing crumbling sections, clearing debris that had accumulated for decades. Days passed, then weeks. Fatigue mounted. Doubt crept in, until a cadaver dog stopped abruptly at the mouth of a sealed drainage tunnel, barking sharply, refusing to move. Engineers pried open the corroded barrier. The stench emerged first, faint, ancient, but unmistakable. Inside, they found fragments scattered across sediment layers, bone, fabric, jewelry, personal effects preserved by darkness and moisture. The tunnel had been used repeatedly, not for one burial, for many. The scale dwarfed even the abandoned mine site. Forensic identification took months. Names emerged slowly, each one reopening a wound thought long scarred. Some families had waited over 30 years. Others had given up hope entirely. A few had already passed away, never learning the fate of their missing loved ones. For them, the truth arrived too late. And as the tally climbed, investigators confronted a number that defied comprehension. Dozens, possibly more. A life's work of destruction. Back in the infirmary, Daniel's condition deteriorated rapidly. His breathing became labored, his speech slurred, his lucidity waned. Yet during rare moments of clarity, he continued to speak in broken fragments, revealing partial coordinates, recalling blurred journeys, referencing places investigators could no longer verify. His memory, once a vault of secrets, unraveled. And in its unraveling, the final truths scattered beyond retrieval. On a gray morning in late autumn, as rain streaked down narrow windows and thunder rolled distantly across the horizon, Daniel Hargrove died. No final confession, no full accounting, no reconciliation, only silence. The announcement came quietly. No press conference, no spectacle, just a short statement confirming the death of an inmate serving multiple life sentences. But for families, the news struck with complicated force. Some felt relief. Others felt rage. Many felt robbed of answers, of closure, of the possibility that truth might one day fully emerge. Grief does not move in straight lines. It coils. It fractures. It resurfaces. And in the wake of his death, emotions clashed violently, colliding in unpredictable waves. Memorials sprang up again. Candles burned beside photographs. Names long absent from conversation were spoken aloud once more. Communities gathered, not to celebrate justice, but to acknowledge the enormity of what had been lost. Because the final chapter had not brought peace. It had brought finality without resolution. And in that space, the haunting realization settled. Some truths are buried so deeply that even time cannot fully exhume them. The investigation officially closed months later. Not because every answer had been found, but because no more could be. Files were archived. Task forces disbanded. Search operations ceased. The land reclaimed its silence. Yet beneath that silence, stories remained. In hidden chambers. In unmarked soil. In the memories of those who would never forget. The Texas 2003 cold case had begun with one missing girl. It ended with a legacy of absence too vast to comprehend. And as the years continued to drift forward, the case settled into history, not as a solved crime, but as a cautionary echo, a reminder that some darkness leaves scars far beyond the reach of law, reason, or time. The world moved on. That was the strangest part. After the death of Daniel Hargrove, after the final excavation teams packed their tools, after the last forensic reports were filed and archived, the machinery of life resumed its familiar rhythm. Traffic lights cycled. Schools opened and closed. New houses rose where old scars had once been carved into the land. Headlines shifted. Attention drifted. And slowly, inevitably, the story slipped from the center of public consciousness. But for those who had lived inside it, the case never truly ended. It lingered in the quiet hours, in sleepless nights, in the hollow spaces left behind by unanswered questions. For the families, time did not heal. It merely rearranged the pain. Rachel Moore's mother stopped leaving her porch light on after nearly 3 decades, not because she no longer hoped, but because exhaustion finally outweighed ritual. Yet even in darkness, she still glanced toward the empty road, as if expecting footsteps that would never return. Lauren Hayes' brother, now gray at the temples, returned home for the first time in 20 years. He stood beside his sister's grave in silence, tracing the engraved letters with trembling fingers, whispering apologies for a lifetime spent running from memory. Emily's parents settled into a small coastal town far from Texas, where the sound of waves replaced the echo of sirens and search helicopters. They walked the shoreline every morning, hand in hand, letting the rhythm of the tide carry away fragments of grief. Yet some days, the sea felt too vast, too final, reminding them of everything they had lost. They spoke of her often, not of how she died, but of how she lived, her laughter, her stubbornness, her plans. They learned, slowly, to let her story exist beyond its ending. For investigators, the case reshaped entire careers. Many retired early, carrying emotional burdens too heavy to set down. Others became advocates, pushing for national reforms in missing persons investigations, data sharing, and forensic funding. Some taught, some wrote, some vanished quietly into private life, unwilling to reopen wounds that had never fully closed. Yet none escaped unchanged. They carried with them the knowledge that monsters do not always arrive in shadows. Sometimes they arrive with borrowed tools, polite smiles, and neatly mowed lawns. The town itself transformed. New families moved in, unaware of the layers of history beneath their feet. Children played in streets once patrolled by search teams. Schools taught the case as distant history, framed as a lesson in vigilance, community, and the fragile nature of safety. But older residents remembered. They remembered the night Emily vanished. They remembered the fear, the suspicion, the helpless waiting, and sometimes, standing alone on quiet porches at dusk, they wondered how many moments they had shared unknowingly with the predator. How many conversations, how many greetings, how many silent opportunities missed. The weight of that realization never fully faded. Across the nation, the case entered the collective memory as one of the most chilling examples of long-term predation. Universities studied it. Law enforcement agencies referenced it. Cold case units cited it as proof that no investigation should ever truly close. And in that sense, its legacy extended beyond tragedy. It changed systems. It saved lives. It reminded the world that persistence, however delayed, could still reach into the past and pull buried truths into the light. But for all its impact, the case left behind a singular, unshakable absence. The absence of certainty. Because even after all that had been uncovered, even after bodies had been found and identities restored, the numbers never fully settled. The true scope of Daniel's crimes remained elusive, blurred by time, silence, and geography. Some families would never receive confirmation. Some names would never be spoken aloud in courtrooms. Some stories would remain locked beneath layers of earth, beyond the reach of human effort. And so, the narrative ended not with resolution, but with restraint. With the acceptance that some mysteries resist completion, that some wounds never fully close, that some shadows persist long after the source of darkness is gone. Years later, a small plaque was installed near the edge of town, overlooking the quiet stretch of road where Emily had last been seen. It bore no graphic detail,
No accusations.
no mention of violence, only names, and beneath them a single line. They were here. They mattered. They are remembered. People stopped there often. Some left flowers. Some stood silently. Some whispered apologies. Some simply stared into the distance, letting memories settle around them. At night, the streetlights cast long, wavering shadows across the pavement, and in that shifting glow, it was easy to imagine footsteps echoing softly, fading into the dark. A reminder, a warning, a promise, that even in the quietest places, truth can wait patiently for decades, and when it finally emerges, it changes everything. Because every cold case is more than an unsolved file. It is a story paused mid-breath, a life suspended in uncertainty, a question echoing through time. And sometimes, when the answers finally come, they do not bring peace. They bring understanding. And in that understanding lies the final burden. To remember, to learn, to never look at ordinary silence the same way again. In the end, it wasn't the confession that mattered most. It was the silence that followed. After the trial concluded, after the verdict was read and the courtroom slowly emptied, an unnatural quiet settled over the town.
No chairs.
No relief.
No celebration.
Only a heavy stillness, as though the air itself were struggling to process what had finally been revealed. Justice had arrived. But it came too late to save anyone. For the families, closure did not arrive in the form they had imagined. There was no moment of release. No sudden easing of pain. Only a deeper understanding of the years they had lost, waiting for answers that would never bring their loved ones back. Emily's parents sat alone in their living room the night the verdict was announced, the television casting pale light across old photographs taped to the walls.
They did not speak.
They did not cry. They simply held hands, listening to the muffled sounds of distant traffic drifting through an open window. For a long time, neither of them moved. Because in that silence, Emily felt closer than she had in decades. Rachel's mother returned to the empty bedroom she had preserved for more than 20 years. She opened the closet and inhaled deeply, as if hoping to catch a lingering trace of her daughter's scent. Then, for the first time, she began to pack away the clothes. Not to forget, but to accept. Lauren's brother stood before reporters and cameras, offering a brief statement. His voice did not waver. "We didn't get our sister back," he said, "but we got the truth. And sometimes, that's the only thing left to hold on to." Across the country, the case dominated headlines for weeks. True crime podcasts dissected every detail. Documentaries reconstructed the timeline. Experts debated how such crimes could remain hidden for so long. But slowly, inevitably, the story began to fade once more. New tragedies replaced old ones. Fresh scandals pushed yesterday's horror from the front page. And the cycle continued. Yet in quiet homes, in empty bedrooms, in worn family albums, the story never ended. Because grief does not follow the news cycle. It does not expire. It simply changes shape. Years later, a letter arrived at the district attorney's office. It had no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. 3 words. There are more. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, possibly written by an aging hand. Investigators never determined its origin. The letter was sealed, archived, and added to a growing file labeled simply, Unconfirmed Leads. Some believed it was a hoax. Others feared it was not. And in that uncertainty, the final shadow of the case lingered. A reminder that even when monsters are captured, the damage they leave behind is vast and sometimes unknowable. On the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, a small vigil gathered near the roadside memorial. Candles flickered in the warm Texas night. Strangers stood beside family, united by a shared silence.
No speeches. No cameras.
Just the soft glow of light against the dark. As midnight approached, a breeze swept across the gathering, bending the flames but not extinguishing them. And in that moment, the message felt clear. The truth, once revealed, cannot be buried again. Memory resists erasure, and silence, no matter how long it holds, will eventually speak. Because every cold case is a whisper from the past, waiting, patient, unyielding, until someone finally listens. The files were supposed to be closed, stamped, archived, shelved. Another cold case finally solved, another chapter sealed in the long and bloody history of American crime. But some cases do not obey endings. They linger. They breathe. They wait. Months after the verdict, detectives return to the evidence room, drawn back by a single detail that refused to settle. The anonymous letter, 3 words scrawled in uneven ink. There are more. At first, it was dismissed as a cruel prank. True crime attracts shadows. Sensational cases invite attention from those seeking notoriety. The department had seen it countless times before. Yet something about the letter felt wrong. Not theatrical. Not dramatic. Just quiet. As if it had been written by someone who had carried its weight for decades. Handwriting analysis suggested an elderly sender. The paper stock was outdated, rarely sold anymore. The envelope bore faint traces of dust and residue consistent with long-term storage, perhaps kept hidden in a drawer, a box, or beneath floorboards for years before finally being mailed. It suggested hesitation.
Delay. Fear.
Detectives reopened the timeline, combing through decades of reports, missing persons databases, unsolved homicides, unexplained disappearances stretching across county lines. They began to notice subtle similarities: young women, rural roadways, late evenings, broken routines, fractured alibis. Not enough to charge, but enough to disturb. One name surfaced repeatedly. A man who had died 3 years before the arrest. A loner, a drifter, a friend of the neighbor. He lived in a trailer less than 15 miles from 2 of the original crime scenes. He had moved frequently, left little trace. His criminal record was minimal, yet his employment history overlapped with multiple disappearance timelines. When detectives attempted to reconstruct his movements, they encountered gaps. Years unaccounted for. Addresses that no longer existed. Witnesses who had died. Records lost to fires, floods, bureaucratic decay. Ghosts in the paperwork. The deeper they dug, the more uncertain everything became. The quiet neighbor had confessed to what he had done. But what if he had not acted alone? What if the silence that protected him had protected others too? The families were never told. Not officially. Investigators feared reopening wounds without proof. But rumors began to spread. Whispers passed between journalists. Fragments leaked online. And once again, the community felt that familiar tightening in the chest. That old fear returning. That old question. Was it really over? In the town, people began locking their doors again. Mothers called their daughters earlier. Streetlights felt dimmer. Long shadows stretched across empty sidewalks at dusk. Some wounds, once reopened, never close. Years passed. No new arrests followed. No bodies were found. The trail cooled. Eventually, The investigation slipped back into obscurity. But among detectives, one truth remained unshaken. Cases like this do not exist in isolation. They ripple. They echo. They connect in ways we may never fully understand. And sometimes, justice does not arrive as a final answer, but as a warning, a reminder that evil rarely stands alone, that monsters do not operate in a vacuum, and that every solved case casts light on 100 others still lost in shadow. Somewhere, perhaps, another letter waits, another confession, another truth buried beneath fear and time. Because the darkest secrets are not the ones that scream. They are the ones that whisper. And as long as those whispers remain unheard, the silence will never truly end. The house was scheduled for demolition on a Monday morning.
No ceremony.
No press. Just a contractor, 2 workers, and a rusted excavator idling beneath a pale Texas sky. It was an unremarkable structure, a sagging single-story home on the edge of town, abandoned for years, slowly collapsing into itself. The windows were shattered. The roof bowed inward. Vines crawled along the siding like veins across decaying skin. Most people had forgotten it existed, except the detectives. Because this had once been the quiet neighbor's house. The place where no screams were heard, where no blood was found, where no evidence had ever surfaced. Yet the anonymous letter had changed everything. There are more. 3 words that refuse to fade. They returned again and again in sleepless nights, in half-finished reports, in the spaces between thoughts. The letter had reopened a door no one had meant to touch. And now, standing beside the condemned house, detectives felt the weight of that decision pressing against their chests. They had obtained a warrant for one final search before demolition. One last chance. Inside, the air smelled of mold and rot. Dust hung in the sunlight like suspended ash. The floor creaked beneath every step. Furniture lay overturned, stripped by scavengers and time. Rats scattered into darkness as flashlights cut across empty rooms. Nothing at first. Just decay. Just abandonment. Just the husk of a life that had concealed monstrous acts. Then one of the workers paused in the hallway. He frowned, tapped his boot against the wooden floor. The sound was wrong. Hollow. Too hollow. The floorboards were pried up slowly, each nail resisting as if the house itself were reluctant to give up its secrets. Beneath the warped planks, a patch of newer concrete stared back, stark and out of place against the older foundation. Silence fell. Even the rats seemed to retreat. The workers backed away. Detectives stepped forward. They knelt
and began to dig.
The concrete was thin, carelessly poured. It broke apart easily. And beneath it, the earth was darker, looser, recently disturbed, though years had passed. The first fragment surfaced after less than a foot of digging. A strip of fabric. Faded blue. Denim. Then bone.
Small.
Delicate.
Human.
The pit widened. And widened.
And widened.
Until the truth lay exposed. 3 bodies. 2 female. 1 male. All young. All bound. All buried together beneath the floor of a quiet home in a quiet town. The news detonated across the community like a delayed explosion. For decades, families had searched, waited, hoped. Now they had answers they had never dared imagine. One of the bodies belonged to a teenage boy who vanished in 1996. Last seen riding his bike home from school. Another, a young woman missing since 1998, her car abandoned beside a highway, keys still in the ignition. The third, a girl no older than 16, never reported missing at all. A runaway. Forgotten. Uncounted. Unnoticed. Suddenly, the neighbor's confession felt incomplete. His crimes were no longer isolated. They were part of something larger. Something darker. Investigators reopened every timeline. Cross-referenced every disappearance. And the picture that emerged was staggering. A pattern spanning more than 15 years. A shadow network of violence hidden beneath ordinary routines. The neighbor had not always acted alone. Sometimes there had been another presence, another vehicle, another voice. Sometimes witnesses recalled seeing two men. Sometimes neighbors remembered unfamiliar silhouettes slipping through backyards at night. And sometimes the report simply ended. Dead ends. Cold trails. Silence. The name resurfaced. The drifter. The friend. The man who had died before the arrest. His fingerprints were found on duct tape recovered from the pit. His DNA lingered on fibers tangled in the victim's clothing. Proof at last. But too late. He was already ashes. The town struggled to comprehend the scale of it. How many times had they passed these men on the street? How many mornings had they waved politely? How many children had ridden bikes past their homes, unaware they were moving through hunting grounds? Trust fractured. Neighbors watched neighbors. Familiar streets felt hostile. Every unlocked door became a question. Every shadow, a threat. The families gathered once more, this time not for a trial, but for funerals delayed by decades. Caskets lowered into soil. Names carved into stone. Histories reclaimed from oblivion. For some, closure arrived. For others, only deeper sorrow. Because knowing the truth did not erase the years stolen. It did not restore birthdays missed. Graduations that never came. Lives that never unfolded. And beneath it all lingered one unbearable realization. If 3 bodies lay beneath that floor, how many others lay elsewhere?
Fields. Woods.
Rivers. Desert. Places no one would ever think to look. The investigation ballooned. New tips poured in. Old cases were reopened. But certainty remained elusive. The drifter was dead. The neighbor was imprisoned. Their secrets were fractured, incomplete. And time had devoured the rest. Years later, a journalist returned to the town. She walked the streets, spoke to survivors, visited the empty lot where the house once stood. Nothing remained, just a flat patch of dirt, grass struggling to grow. Yet standing there, she felt it, a pressure, a heaviness, as though the ground itself still remembered. And perhaps it did, because some places absorb suffering. They store it. They hold on to it long after the people are gone. The journalist wrote that the town had changed forever, not because monsters had lived there, but because ordinary life had unknowingly sheltered them. And that truth shattered the illusion of safety more completely than any crime ever could. The final article ended with a single line. Some stories do not end when the killers are caught. They end when the last secret is unearthed. And in this town, beneath quiet streets and peaceful homes, too many secrets remained buried, waiting, listening, breathing in the dark. They thought the story had ended beneath the floorboards. They believed the bones were the final confession. They were wrong. It began with a cardboard box discovered in the back of a condemned storage facility, miles outside town, scheduled for clearance after years of unpaid rent. The unit belonged to the drifter, the man who had died before he could be questioned, the man whose fingerprints now connected him to graves that had slept for decades. Inside the box were old clothes, rusted tools, a cracked leather wallet, and beneath them all, wrapped in yellowing plastic, a handheld cassette recorder. No label, no note, just dust and silence. The device was fragile, its casing cracked, its buttons stiff with age. The battery compartment was corroded, but technicians coaxed it back to life, careful, deliberate, as if awakening something that had never truly been asleep. When the tape began to spin, the room froze. At first, only static, then breathing, slow, measured,
Controlled.
and then a voice.
Low. Calm. Too calm.
This is for when I'm gone. The words crawled through the speakers, hollow and intimate, as if whispered directly into the ear. The voice was not the neighbor's. It was not the drifter's. It belonged to someone else. Someone unknown. Someone who had never appeared in any report, any witness statement, any investigation. I kept the records. Not trophies. Proof. In case the others talked. in case they forgot their place. A faint click, a shuffle of paper. Names were read aloud.
Dates.
Locations. Coordinates. Each one a wound reopened. Disappearances that had haunted police files across multiple states. Missing children. College students. Hitchhikers. Runaways. Young men. Young women. People who vanished and became numbers, then footnotes, then memories too heavy to carry. I wasn't the one who took them. Most of the time, the voice continued. I just watched. I planned. I cleaned. I buried. I made sure no one found what they weren't meant to see. Silence. Then a soft exhale. They were sloppy. Emotional. I wasn't. Investigators stared at each other in disbelief. The scope shattered every assumption. This was not a pair of killers. Not even a small group. This was a network. A loose, drifting constellation of predators, bound by opportunity, secrecy, and a shared understanding that silence was survival. The voice described highways, truck stops, abandoned rest areas, cheap motels, isolated farms, places where no one noticed or no one cared. We didn't hunt together. That draws attention. We rotated. Shared information. Shared routes. Shared opportunities. The tape continued for nearly 2 hours. A map of terror. A blueprint of disappearance. And then, near the end, a final confession. There are things even they don't know. Things I kept for myself. The ones who fought hardest. The ones who begged. The ones who looked me in the eye and tried to remember my face. A pause.
Long. Heavy.
I made sure no one ever would. The recording ended abruptly, the tape snapping into silence, so complete it felt like pressure against the skull. The room remained still long after the device stopped. No one spoke, because everyone understood the same unbearable truth. They had not uncovered a story. They had uncovered a system. Authorities assembled a national task force within days. The coordinates were cross-referenced. Excavations began. Fields were dug. Riverbanks drained. Forests combed. Wells searched. Deserts mapped. They found some. Too many. But not all. And they never found him. The voice. The architect. The man who had organized horror with clinical detachment. No records matched. No fingerprints aligned. No DNA surfaced. It was as if he had erased himself completely. As if his greatest crime was not murder, but disappearance. Across the country, families received calls they had waited decades for. Some learned where their children rested. Some learned how they died. Some learned nothing, except that hope had finally expired. And yet, among investigators, a deeper fear took root. If one man could vanish so completely, how many others had done the same? Years passed. The story slowly dissolved into documentaries, podcasts, academic studies. It became a symbol of systemic failure, of the dangers hidden within indifference, of how easily predators move when no one is looking. But then, 27 years after the first disappearance, a woman cleaning out her late father's belongings discovered a locked metal box beneath a false panel in his garage. Inside were photographs, coordinates, and a single cassette tape. The voice was identical. The cadence, the pauses, the breath. "I see you finally found this," the voice said softly. "If you're listening, it means I miscalculated. And for that, I apologize." A faint chuckle. By now, most of them are gone.
Dead.
Prison.
Dust.
It doesn't matter. What matters is that the silence remains. Another pause. Longer. More deliberate. "You'll want to know who I am. You won't. Names are temporary. Fear is permanent." A scraping sound. Metal sliding. "I built something that cannot be undone. Even if you find every body. Even if you burn every record. The damage is already complete." The tape ended with a final sentence. One that no investigator, no journalist, no family member ever forgot. There are still places no one has searched. The woman turned the tape over. A date was scrawled in black ink. 3 weeks earlier. He was alive. And somewhere, in the vast silence between cities, between roads, between lives, a man still walked freely, carrying secrets no one could reach. Because some monsters do not hide in the dark. They hide in plain sight. They wear ordinary faces, live ordinary lives,
And wait, patiently,
for time to erase their footprints.